Hi guys, it's Miss Yandell. I hope you're having a really great week. So I know that this week for your major essay, you're reading Benjamin Franklin's remarks concerning the savages of North America. And if you've read that already, then certainly you know what I'm talking about when I say Benjamin Franklin was not calling the Native Americans quote-unquote savages. He was using a term that was used by other people. I hope you get that. Sometimes people write their responses in their essays and they miss entirely Benjamin Franklin's point of this essay. So before you turn that essay in, make sure that you understand what Benjamin Franklin was trying to say, okay? And going forward from that, I do not want to miss this section of the book. You guys, our books are huge, right? But there's a very, very important section. Now, we've talked about Mary Rowlandson. We're now talking about Franklin's piece. But there's an important section about historical accuracy and historical inaccuracy of Native American stories, the politics, etc. And what I mean by that, if you'll go to page 221, there's an introduction to this section on the Native American voices they include here at this time period, and it says Native Americans, contact, and conflict. Okay, so this section really deals with the conflict that happens when these two groups have contact with each other. And so as you read through here, I mean, the very first part kind of debunks the story of, at least the Disney version, of Pocahontas. And not only does it kind of tell you what really happened by everyone's best estimates, but it also tells you why it happened, like why they sent Pocahontas to help Captain John Smith. And so that's kind of interesting too, knowing the motivation behind that action. So I want you to kind of peruse this. For some of you, this is going to be really interesting, and I know for some of you it may just be another history update, but I never cease to be amazed at how much people do not know. I mean, and I hate to say this because I know you know better, but there's so many people who think the Disney versions of everything are the accurate versions, or the movie versions of everything. That's historical accuracy. Well, there are some things that we miss when we don't study in depth. And so this chapter right here just reminds us not only that what we've been told may be a partial or absolutely inaccurate version of what happened historically, but also to think about who's telling the story. So for instance, in this section and in the introductions to the pieces I'm going to reference here in just a minute, one thing they remind you is that very often what comes to us from speeches by various Native American leaders is translations. It's been translated by people who wrote English. So much has been lost. I mean, they're very upfront in the book saying, you know, while we have these speeches and while we believe they are the most accurate versions of these speeches, they may not be accurate at all. The book does say they go to great trouble not to put anything that is considered to be fabricated, and they tell you that a lot of Native American speeches were fabricated. So talk about inaccuracy and talk about historical confusion. Okay, so, and some people don't even bother to know any of this or to say any of this, and I appreciate the book pointing out that what we have is very often a best estimate of what was said and how it was said. However, looking through some of the selections that they have, what I'm going to ask you to do in the discussion board is to look over the introduction on 221 and 222, and then to choose one of the speeches to analyze. The first one is by Pontiac, and guys, I hope you're as into this as I am. I really enjoy reading and rereading this material. Every semester I teach this class, I just fall in love with it again. Just as they're great reminders about what really happened and what really transpired, historically speaking. So there's a collection here, and this one, Pontiac, the speech at Detroit, may be one that you want to look at. I think what's interesting on page 224, 225, and beyond that, but Samson Occam's piece, and he's someone who was a Christian. He was converted to Christianity and became a minister, and it talks about, the introduction talks about his life, and it's from A Short Narrative of My Life, so that's word for word his own wording, but he learned, he was a minister and had really kind of dire circumstances and some unfortunate things happened to him in his life. Okay, then you go into Logan. Interestingly enough, this is Thomas Jefferson's account of Chief Logan. And it says here on page 227 that Thomas Jefferson said he heard Logan's speech directly from Gibson, and that he wrote it down in his memo book. And then when people challenged him later, he got, like, it says he published this long paper telling how many people said that he actually heard it. Like, he had people attesting that the authenticity. Oh, here it is. So on the top of page 228, when some claimed that the speech was a fraud, Jefferson responded by printing 23 pages of affidavits testifying to its authenticity in the 1801 edition of Notes on the State of Virginia. Okay, well, I mean, talk about somebody who's committed to authenticity. That would be Thomas Jefferson. I mean, he had people signing legal documents that what he had heard was that this was accurate. So you have this speech here of Chief Logan's on 228. I want to read that last paragraph to you that starts on page 228 because I think it's really interesting, the content of it. And it says, this is allegedly from Chief Logan. I appeal to any white man to say, if ever he entered Logan's cabin hungry and he gave him not meat, if ever he came cold and naked and he clothed him not. During the course of the last long and bloody war, Logan remained idle in his cabin, an advocate for peace. Such was my love for the whites, that my countrymen pointed as they passed and said, Logan is the friend of white men. I had even thought to have lived with you, but for the injuries of one man. And it goes on and it talks about him being called upon for revenge. But I really want you to look over some of these introductions. It's kind of incredible, and some of the stories that you read are infuriating, to say the least. It's hard to read this. You know, I don't know if it's just my DNA that makes it hard to read this, or just my compassion for humanity, and also how infuriated I get with people for being so dim-witted and mean. Does anybody know what I'm saying right now? So you see a lot of this in the voices here. In Red Jacket's speech, I would strongly suggest Red Jacket is a major historical figure, especially with regard to Native American history. So I would strongly urge you. I've got like the whole thing highlighted. Can you see that? I've got highlights all over the place on Red Jacket, his introduction and the speech. So, you know, if I can urge you, unless you're interested in one of these other ones, definitely look at this speech. Now, the thing about Red Jacket is I love comparing Red Jackets to Tecumseh's. Although there is question, like I said, about how much of it's included, how much is left out, how accurate these speeches truly are. And we don't know. Some of these things we just don't know. But I love the comparison and contrast between Red Jacket's speech and Tecumseh's speech. Now look at the audiences, because the audiences are very different. When you're with Red Jacket, you're talking about, Red Jacket is speaking to the European descendants. I mean, I don't know how to say that other than that. And Tecumseh's trying to rally inner tribes to work together against the European influence. And so I find these things fascinating. And there are just a few selections here. I'm only going to ask you to respond to one of the speeches included here. And I would expect you to read the introduction to that particular speech, so you'll know kind of the significance, why that has been included here. But you're welcome to do a comparison and contrast, especially with Red Jacket and Tecumseh. But I also find the other one very interesting, where he became a minister, and they basically, after he, had converted, they basically kicked him to the curb, and he was on his own. I mean, it's just, and destitute. There are just some things that happened that, are worth revisiting. Because I think a lot of times we, Walt Disney, our entire history, we just want to look at the good things, or we gloss over things that happened that were absolutely awful. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, so this week's instructor lecture just invites you to look over some of these speeches by the Native Americans and their leadership. Okay, these were random people. These were leaders in the Native American tribes at this time. And I want you to think about that and how it relates to today, but what they were saying in those speeches, and what kind of impact do you think those speeches have on us today? Okay, so I look forward to reading your responses on the Franklin piece in your essays, and I look forward to reading your responses on at least one of these Native American speeches included in the book. Okay, I hope you have a great day and a great week. I'll see you next time. Bye.